Now I will introduce New Yorkers for Parks. Um, and I'll introduce Jessica and Emily from New Yorkers for Parks.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Twywana, and thanks so much to GreenThumb for inviting us to be a part of today's event. I'm Emily Walker. I'm the Director of Outreach and Programs at New Yorkers for Parks, and it's great to be here. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jessica.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Jessica Saab, the Advocacy and Communications Project Manager for New Yorkers for Parks. Happy to join you all virtually. Very much enjoyed last year's conference and happy to see the transition, or sorry, I mean the year before last year. And we have a presentation, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the end. So, advocating for New York City's green spaces. This will be a presentation about our work and the different resources we have available to everyone in New York. So let's go ahead and begin. About New Yorkers for Parks. So if you don't know us, we are the only independent citywide organization that advocates for quality parks and open spaces for all New Yorkers. So we're citywide, we care about every single open space, and we were established over 100 years ago. We count our official beginning date as 1908. And we've been kind of a merge of multiple groups that have formed over the years to care for New York City's parks. So for over 100 years, we've championed equitable development, distribution, and maintenance of open spaces across all of New York City. And the way we work and the way we do these things is through partnerships with different grassroots groups, different nonprofit organizations, funders, foundations. We do advocacy, advocating on behalf of the New York City Parks Department and other agencies and branches of the agency, such as GreenThumb. And we also do research. So we take a look at different open spaces across New York City. We look at where things are lacking. We try to bring together those numbers in ways that then we can convey to others in compelling ways in order to aid the rest of these things. So altogether, it works. On to the next thing.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to give just a brief kind of overview of where we are now in terms of parks. I think, for those of us who are really active stewards of our local green spaces, I'm sure none of this information is going to come as a surprise, but we still think it's helpful to be transparent about how the city operates and how it's funding our parks and open spaces. The pandemic has really had an outsized impact on the city in a variety of ways, but it's also had a major impact on our parks and open spaces. And I know for GreenThumb gardeners, there's been a particular impact and the work that you're doing and the ability to access those spaces and have the public access them. But one of the things that we really want to help drive home to decision makers, everyday New Yorkers, is the fact that during this crisis, the Parks Department has suffered a 14% budget cut. This was the second largest agency cut sustained by any agency that operates in New York City. And we think this is really troubling because at the same time that the pandemic has unfolded, and as the city and public health experts have encouraged folks to be outside as a way to safely gather, seek respite for mental and physical health and well-being, and connect with loved ones that we may not be able to see indoors. We're also seeing a real decline in the amount of public support and dollars that are going to take care of our open space network. And I think, for any of us New Yorkers who have endured the last year, but especially last spring and summer and the early fall months, we're really seeing the impacts of those budget cuts in real time, which is, we're not seeing trash get picked up as much. Staff is stretched really, really thin right now for New York City parks. The Parks Department has been tracking the conditions of parks and open spaces. I don't think this is necessarily something that happens in gardens, so I'll put a caveat with this second point, but The conditions that the Parks Department itself has been tracking for the overall condition of parks are the worst since they've started this record keeping, which I think 2004 was the first year. So, even the city is finding that it's not able to keep up with the pace of extreme usership that New Yorkers are really applying to their parks right now. One of the things that has been most troubling to us, and we hope we don't return to this, but I think it's a telling statistic. This past spring, when parks and playgrounds that were small and were deemed of a certain size that was not appropriate for social distancing, and when those parks were closed, a million New Yorkers lost access to their local open spaces. There are so many neighborhoods throughout the 5 boroughs that do not have large open spaces, and we really saw this play out in a troubling way as the gates were locked on these parks throughout the city. And for us, it really just surfaced and has shed light on the fact that New York City does not have enough open space to serve New Yorkers. We know that community gardens are a really critical piece of the puzzle in terms of, creating neighborhood level open spaces and gathering spaces and natural education. And they provide so many benefits. But we also know that, more attention needs to be paid to the fact that the open space network is just not serving New Yorkers. And, I think for us historically, some of these issues that the pandemic has shown a light on are new, but they're also not new. The Parks Department has been chronically underfunded since the budget crisis of the 1970s. Again, we know that there's just simply not enough open space to serve all 8.5 million New Yorkers that live here. And we also know that statistically speaking, the parks that are in lower income and communities of color tend to be smaller in size. And so we really see these sort of acute factors all coming together. And on top of that, there's been research that's been done that finds that there's probably at this point more than $6 billion in deferred maintenance in terms of improving the infrastructure of our parks and gardens. And that's things like fencing, drainage, retaining walls, things that are really hard to do fundraising for with your local elected officials. So we really need to see the city putting some of its public dollars into making those changes. I'll have Jessica go on to the next slide to talk about how we're trying to address some of these issues.
For sure. And actually, Emily, I think this one is listed for you to take.
Yes, definitely. So our Play Fair for Parks campaign is an effort that we started in 2019. It's a coalition-based effort. Some of you may be involved through your gardens already. We have a number of community gardens that are members of our coalition. If your garden is not a member, we would love to have you. We're happy to connect after this presentation to share more info about what this effort is. But it's been a way for us to really try and draw attention to some of these chronic issues of underfunding that the Parks Department has had. So we started this effort in 2019 with an ask of, getting more expense funding to NYC Parks for things like maintenance, operations, staffing, programming. We were really thrilled in the first year of our advocacy. We got a $44 million addition to the NYC Parks operating budget. That included a historic $8.2 million that was just for community gardens. And I want to note that there's never been a citywide investment by public officials and public dollars to support our community garden network. So, this was a really significant win, I think, for open space advocates and New Yorkers. Last year, as the pandemic and the economic crisis unfolded, we found ourselves in a really challenging position as advocates because the city budget was just really not where it needed to be for any agency, but Parks has just traditionally been an agency that bears the brunt of budget cuts, and we really saw that play out. We were successful in saving 100 city park worker and 50 gardener positions to do critical maintenance and operations work throughout the city. But beyond that, we really saw a loss of seasonal staff, the funding for the GreenThumb division, the funding for the natural resources group that service our natural areas, urban park rangers. We saw a lot of funding wins that we had in the first year, evaporate as the city's economic crisis has unfolded. So this year we're focusing on kind of getting ourselves back to the needs that we know we have as a city. And we're also thinking about the fact that we not only have to do this short-term budget advocacy, but it's also an election year, which many of you may be aware of. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica now. I think she's going to give you all a sort of sneak preview of that work that we'll be doing.
Exactly. So our newest advocacy platform will be going live in March, but for our GreenThumb crowd, we've prepared a special sneak peek. So the 2021 platform has a couple of main tenets, and I'll walk you all through those. But first, I'll encourage you to sign up for our emails at bit.ly/ny4p-news. We're upgrading our emailing system, and we're hoping to really lead a digital campaign, especially now that the world has ushered in this virtual era, for better or for worse. We really want to be able to adapt to that, and so we encourage you all to please join our email list and be up to date on these things as we roll them out. So number one, fund NYC Parks to handle the pandemic crowds in summer 2021. We really want to prioritize funding so that parks can actually take care of its parks, especially in this era of a pandemic when there's increased usage, increased demand for parks and open space. So that's one of our main priorities. Second, establishing a citywide vision and comprehensive planning. Not sure how many of you tuned into yesterday's day-long hearing with the City Council on comprehensive planning legislation, but this is something that we want to encourage the city to move towards and to have a citywide vision for parks and open spaces as well. Number three, doubling down on New York City Parks funding for the future. So we're really thinking of the future in general, and we want this platform to be something that the new administrations take into account and enact. So we'll have the numbers to back all of this up. Number four, building parks and open spaces where they are needed the most. As Emily touched upon, at the beginning of this pandemic, a lot of people, 1 million people of 1 in 8 folks in New York lost access to their local park. And there are many districts within New York City that just lack open space in general. Folks do not live within walking distance. So we need to prioritize those areas and make sure that that access is there. Number five, fixing the capital process so parks are built faster and more efficiently. I'm sure a lot of you might have some experience with the capital process, potentially if you're someone who's involved with local parks, local gardens, you know that it can sometimes be a little bit of a headache. So we think that there are ways to upgrade that process. And number six, supporting the nonprofits and groups that operate in and program parks. And I guess we left off gardens on this point just to make sure it fit on the slide, but definitely gardens are part of this. So many grassroots groups manage and take care of different parks and open spaces and use them as spots. Like as we've seen in the last year, so many gardens and parks have become the sites of mutual aid and distribution of needed resources. So we want the city to acknowledge those efforts and continue to support them in whatever way possible. So once again, I'll plug the email. Please go ahead and subscribe to our emails. I will be transparent and say that I'm the one who composes them and sends them. I put a lot of effort, a lot of love into that HTML coding, which I've had to learn. So please, I encourage you to join us because they are looking beautiful, if I do say so myself. And yeah, we'll head on over to some resources that we have available. So to begin, I'm going to also plug another project I've worked on. I've had the honor of working on. So 2 years ago, as an introductory fellow at New Yorkers for Parks, I was able to conduct a multimedia research project that explores community gardens, their past, present, and future through a 4-part audio series, which is a podcast. It's called Lots to Grow. And I was super lucky to travel across the city. Of course, this was pre-COVID times. Interviewed over 35 gardeners and parks staff, different folks that have expertise in the field. And so this podcast is available to listen to on any podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. It's 4 parts. They're kind of long as episodes. So, maybe when you're cleaning the house or going for a walk, you might want to give it a listen. But yeah, let's see what else to say about it. Super shout out to GreenThumb for shifting to virtual programming and also for all of this Spanish interpretation. I'm continually impressed and in awe of everything that GreenThumb does for the community. So yeah, I'll head on over to the next one. Emily.
Thank you, Jessica. So many of you hopefully have participated in our Daffodil Project. It's our signature public program at New Yorkers for Parks. And it's a really amazing way that we've been able to directly support gardeners and Friends of Park groups, as well as schools and NYCHA gardeners. We distribute free daffodil bulbs every fall to New Yorkers who are willing to plant them in public spaces throughout the 5 boroughs. This program started after September 11th, and in the first fall of 2001, we planted 1 million bulbs throughout parks and open spaces in the 5 boroughs. And those bulbs were donated by the Dutch government in response to what had happened on 9/11. So it's a living memorial program that we've been running now for almost 20 years. This fall will be our 20th anniversary season, which is really significant for us. We were unfortunately unable to do the Daffodil Project last fall, given COVID and budget constraints. But we're really excited, and we're in the planning stages now of figuring out how to bring this program back. And we're optimistic that by the fall, the public health picture will be hopefully far brighter than it is right now, and that we'll be able to safely bring this program back to you all. But we would encourage you all to participate. The bulbs are a great way to beautify your block, to do plantings with folks of all ages. Bulbs are really forgiving. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. As gardeners, you all are experts, but it's really a great way to have a visual impact on your communities. And so if you're interested in learning more, again, our newsletter is always a great way to stay on top of it, but you can also go to the Daffodil Project section of our website to learn more as well.
Awesome. And I'll just point your attention to this map that shows all the different planting locations. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, it's really 5 boroughs. These bulbs go far. And so we're happy to hopefully continue that tradition this year for the 20-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. Next up, we have the open space profiles. So this is one of our other citywide projects. Our open space profiles are different reports on each district in New York City. It takes a look at open space quality, access, amenities, all different factors, and they're quantified, counted, compared against each other, and then presented in these 2-page front and back, like at a glance fact sheets, you could say. And so we've done them about every 5 years. So our latest version is actually about to come out. The 2021 versions will now be based on community board districts instead of city council districts, as they've been based on in the past. This is because the census just happened, so redistricting will be happening soon in New York City. So city council districts will look different, and community boards are also just where a lot of grassroots organization happens. So we think this will be very helpful. And correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I think this is also the districts that Parks uses internally for different, like, cleaning, or what is it?
Yeah, the Parks Department itself allocates its own resources and staff on a community district boundary. So there's a lot of reasons that we felt it was important to make this change, and we're really hopeful that our advocates will be able to take this data as it's released soon. So more to come.
Yes, and so our newest version will have an extra focus on health, and it'll also be completely in Spanish. So please let us know if there are organizations that we should specifically be reaching out to provide this Spanish resource. We'll have an outreach strategy to try to get these into as many people's hands as we can, but that's something else that we're really excited about this year that we want to spread far and wide. So stay tuned for those. Next up, we have our open space index reports. So this is a different kind of report we do that's much more focused on neighborhoods themselves. And we've done 10 of these reports on different neighborhoods that were being studied for rezonings. And so this is kind of similar to the open space profiles, in which we take a very in-depth look at the different open spaces, the access, the quality. And then we also go and talk to a bunch of groups in that area, people who interact with those spaces, in order to issue recommendations. So take a look at those on our website. Next up.
So hopefully some of you have seen this guide. If not, we're really excited to introduce it to you. The How Can I Improve My Park guide is a project that we undertook about 6 years ago now with our friends at the Center for Urban Pedagogy and Partnerships for Parks. It outlines the process that community groups and New Yorkers can take to seek park or garden improvements, either through advocating for expense funding for better maintenance or staffing in your local open space. But the thing that I think is really special about this is that it folds out. If I had it physically, I would show you, but it folds out into a giant poster that's almost like a chutes and ladders style game of like, how do you engage with the city of New York to get funding for your local park or garden? Because your elected officials have funding to give. It's not always clear how you navigate that process. So this walks you through what role does the community board play? What role does NYC Parks play? How can you engage with your local council member and find out how to work with their staff and work with your elected officials? What's the time frame that you can expect as you go through this process? So it's a really great primer on understanding what's otherwise kind of a complicated process, but it's also, the way that our parks and open spaces tend to get improved in the city of New York, because New York City Parks doesn't have its own what's called discretionary capital budget, which means the agency is pretty reliant on everyday New Yorkers engaging with their elected officials to demand these improvements, and also community boards demanding these improvements. So again, to Jessica's point about our forthcoming open space profiles and there's a lot to sort of understand about how you can work with the city. And this is a great primer. So we would encourage you all to look at that on our website. It's available as a PDF download. If you're interested in physical copies, you can let us know. We do have occasional access to our office where we can, perhaps drop one in the mail if you're interested in learning more. This one's available in English and Spanish, and hopefully in subsequent years we can get funding to translate it into even more languages, because it's a really amazing guide and we're incredibly proud of it. Have Jessica advance to the next slide. And so something else we want to call your attention to is our Public Realm Bill of Rights. This is what we developed in 2017 for the election that happened then. It's still a guiding sort of document that we use. It informs our open space index series in terms of how we frame our recommendations for the city and for community members. This was derived with feedback from community groups and gardeners that we've worked with over the years. So we're really proud of this as sort of a philosophical guiding document that drives a lot of the work that we do at New Yorkers for Parks. It's available in English, Spanish, simplified Chinese, but it really lays out sort of the long-term vision that we still believe every New Yorker should have in their community in terms of open space access, what the city should be providing in terms of caring for our parks and gardens. So we just want to call some attention to that, and I'll have Jessica move on to the next slide. Our Clean and Green Guide is a quick primer on who cleans our parks. It's not actually all that clear for New Yorkers to understand the staffing of the agency and who does what. So this is a great sort of crash course on learning about how the Parks Department works and who you can engage with if you need help. And then our Improve Your Park toolkit is sort of a high-level overview of all of the resources that New Yorkers for Parks has available. It gives a really helpful sort of general timeline about what you as a New Yorker who cares about your local open spaces can do, like when do you plug into various city processes. It also has a list of some of our peer organizations' resources, so it's a really great sort of quick guide and way of grounding yourself in how to be a more effective open space advocate. Next slide. All right, and I think this last one is Jessica.
Yes, so we listed here just some other data sources from other partners that can be used for advocacy. We have some great data from the Department of City Planning, Department of Health, and as I know this will be recorded and we're kind of at the 20-minute mark, I might just leave it so that folks can maybe come back to this and find some of these, but there's a lot of great aggregations of data being done by other organizations in the city. So we do want to have that synergy and have our data also complement these other groups and vice versa. So thank you so much for your attention. We welcome any questions. Here's our contact information. Do not hesitate to reach out and follow us on social media if you'd like. That's where we also put a lot of our updates. And yeah, that's what
Thank you, Emily and Jessica. That was great. I'm glad we got a sneak peek of the 2021 platform. Thank you, Jessica. That was awesome. I love when I could get a sneak peek of things before everyone else. And also, I would like to thank New Yorkers for Parks because for every harvest fair, they always donate our daffodil bulbs. So thank you. And you guys, if you ever been to Harvest Fair, I'm pretty sure you got a bag of bulbs. So thanks to Emily and Jessica for that.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions that came in through the chat. One question is, how community board help gardens and parks, because it will be good to understand the procedure.
It's a great question. So most community boards in the city, there are 59. They all tend to have a parks or a parks and environment committee. So that's a really important group to try and engage with, and community boards meet regularly. If you haven't ever attended a community board meeting or hearing, we encourage folks to at least attend one or sit in, because it's a really interesting process. Community boards are intended to be like, that the most local level of government. While community boards don't necessarily have binding decision-making approval or funding to give, they have a really important voice in public processes, from land use decisions to the city budget process. One of the reasons we encourage folks to learn more and get more involved with their local community boards is that every year they put out what's called a community district needs statement. And that happens each September, I believe. And that is a process where the community board, based on public input from residents of the district, helps the city understand where the city should be putting its dollars. So that includes, priorities for capital funding and infrastructure improvements across all agencies, but certainly parks and gardens are one of them. So, if your garden has needs that, city funding could help address, working with your local community board is a great way to make sure that they're aware of those issues, that they're advocating for them to be included in the district needs statement. So, there's a lot of different ways that community boards can be helpful, but I think, for us, we're always encouraging folks to get more involved in every level of government, because folks need to hear from you, right? They need to hear about the issues that are happening in your local open spaces in your gardens. So we have a lot of resources on the NY4P website. We actually didn't cover it in the presentation, but we have a webinar that we did last year on the importance of community boards for park and garden advocates. So we can try to share the link to that. I don't know that I can quickly dig up the link right now and put it in the chat, but we would be happy to send it out to our GreenThumb peers so it can be circulated. But it's a great sort of crash course in understanding how community boards relate with park and garden issues. So I hope that was helpful. But again, we're happy to answer any questions, or please feel free to reach out to us after this presentation to learn more.
Right, and I guess I'll just also say that I'm really lucky to be part of a community garden myself. I'm part of the No Wastelands community garden here in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And the community board district manager is also a member of our garden. So sometimes it works out where someone at the community board is actually a garden member as well. And there have been different efforts that they've led in order to establish other gardens across the district. So while that's kind of a unique case, I think it's worth mentioning as a fun fact.
Yes, thank you. So have a couple of more questions. Where can we get the bulbs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Twywana mentioned, we always give bulbs to GreenThumb to distribute at the Harvest Fair, and we hope to be able to do that again this year, assuming we can do in-person gatherings and events again. But I would encourage you to sign up for the NY4P newsletter. Every summer, we release a bulb registration form to the public. It's through our website. It's generally from mid-August through just after Labor Day. We have a registration form. You can go on, you can tell us how many bulbs you hope to get, where you're going to be planting them. You give us your contact info and you pick a distribution site. We host one distribution per borough, and they're usually on a weekend, a Saturday, or sometimes a Sunday, depending on the borough. And you come and you pick up your bulbs from us, and then you take them to plant with your community group. So they're free. We just love to provide them to groups that are planting them throughout the city. So if you want to learn more, you can certainly reach out to me. But again, we would encourage you to sign up for the NY4P newsletter. It's a great way to stay on top of updates for the Daffodil Project.
Well, thank you. I'm glad they will fill out the form so they can get their bubs. So we have time for one more question. What is your relationship with the Friends of Parks groups and various parks conservancies?
It's a really good question. So we work really closely with our peer organizations, but also stewardship groups throughout the city. Our Play Fair Coalition is really born out of the longstanding connections that we've had with these groups. We have over 300 organizations now that are part of the coalition itself. And so what we try to do is both be a sounding board for the issues that stewards and friends of groups and various park organizations are having. We as an independent organization can really be an advocate. Sometimes that means we're a cheerleader for New York City Parks. Other times it means we're a constructive critic. And we really rely on having, a connection with community groups and open space stewards and advocates throughout the city to understand how we can best advocate for what needs to happen to make our open space network more equitable and accessible to everyone. So we really try to support folks by both listening and taking feedback and building that into the advocacy work that we do. But we also try to empower community groups by helping them understand how they can navigate various processes in city government, like understanding how you can testify at a city council hearing or be a part of the budget process. I think last year really showed that there's a lot of interest in city budget processes, which is exciting for me as a staff person who is kind of mired in that wonky work every year. But we really try to sort of demystify the public process around how park investments and staffing decisions are made. And so, if you're interested in learning more about the work that we do, you can certainly reach out to Jessica and I. But, New Yorkers for Parks tries to be a real resource and a sounding board for folks. Jessica, I don't know if you have anything that you would want to add to that as well.
I think we're almost out of time here, but I would just say that we've also encouraged those groups to like cross-pollinate amongst each other, share resources amongst each other, and even organize at the borough level. So we're constantly in touch, and we always want to know of any new groups and get them into our fold, get them into our contact list, so that they can also be aware of like the citywide work that's going on and how they can plug into it. It often feels like these things happen very separately. And that was actually kind of the goal of my podcast project with community gardens. They're like these unique spaces, these unique groups of dedicated volunteers across the city that kind of seem to just be working on their own very hyper local situation. And so it was an effort to like elevate those voices and share their stories. And so that's also what we try to do with the Friends of groups.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Emily and Jessica, for that wonderful presentation. It's always a pleasure to have our Green partners work with us.